For over a century, the story of the American Southwest was a ghost story. It was a story of a people who built cities in cliffs, carved roads into canyons, and then, as if overnight, vanished. They were called the Anasazi, a name that itself became a whisper. The mystery of their disappearance was romantic, tragic, and total. And it was almost entirely wrong. The empty cities of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde are not monuments to a lost people. They are waypoints in a much longer journey. The new archaeological story, pieced together from tree rings, pottery shards, human bones, and living voices, is not about a vanishing. It's about a transformation. A story of how a people didn't disappear, but instead chose to become something new. And it begins by understanding that the very question we were asking, where did the Anasazi go, was the wrong question. The real question was, who were they in the first place, and who are their children today? The CITIS of silence. To stand in Chaco Canyon at midday is to feel small. The scale is monumental. Pueblo Bonito alone is a testament to an organized, powerful society, with over 600 rooms rising 5 stories high. This wasn't a village. It was the ceremonial and political heart of a vast network. For 300 years, from 850 to 1150 AD, it was the center of a world. Further north at Mesa Verde they built in the sky. Cliff Palace, tucked under a massive rock overhang, is a city of stone and timber, perfectly preserved in the dry air. These weren't primitive structures. They were feats of engineering, oriented to the sun and stars, pulsing with life. Then, by the year 1300, the pulse faded. The great houses of Chaco were long empty. The cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde fell silent. The people were gone. Early Anglo explorers and archaeologists like Richard Wetherill in the 1890s found pottery, tools, even mummified bodies, but they found no living people. The conclusion seemed obvious. A catastrophe must have occurred. An unknown enemy, a deadly plague, or some profound climate disaster must have wiped them out. The people had vanished. And so the myth was born. It was cemented by a name borrowed from the local Navajo, Anasazi, meaning something like ancient enemies or ancient ones who are not us. The name itself framed them as disconnected, extinct. For decades, that story was enough. It filled museums and history books, but it couldn't explain what the evidence was starting to show, that people don't simply vanish, they move. The Great Drought. The first crack in the vanishing myth came from the trees. Andrew Ellicott Douglas, an astronomer, developed a technique in the early 20th century that allowed him to see into the past. It was called dendrochronology, tree ring dating. By matching the patterns of thick and thin rings in ancient construction beams from the cliff dwellings, he could build a year-by-year calendar of the climate. What he discovered was stark. Beginning in the year 1276 and lasting for 23 years, there was a catastrophic drought, the Great Drought. It was the perfect villain. No water meant no corn, no beans, no squash. No food meant starvation and collapse. The mystery seemed solved. The Anasazi didn't vanish by magic. They were driven out or killed by a climate catastrophe. But as archaeologists looked closer, the simple answer became complicated. The ancestral Pueblo people had faced severe droughts before. They were expert dryland farmers. They had survived. Why was this time different? The drought was a huge part of the story, a massive push factor, but it wasn't the whole story. The truth was deeper and darker. A society under stress. The next layer of evidence came from the bones. At sites across the region, bioarchaeologists began to re-examine human remains from that final period of occupation. What they found was not a picture of a peaceful society succumbing to nature. They found evidence of extreme violence. Researchers like Tim Kohler at Washington State University compiled a database of human remains from the period. Their findings were chilling. They saw a dramatic spike in trauma, skulls crushed by clubs, bodies that were never properly buried, and in some rare, horrific cases, evidence of cannibalism. This wasn't random violence. It seemed organized. Entire villages appeared to have been attacked. Something was breaking down within the society itself. The drought was squeezing resources, and people were turning on each other. At the same time, the old religion, centered in Chaco Canyon, seemed to be losing its power. The great houses were abandoned long before the Great Drought. New religious ideas, perhaps a new Katsina faith, were emerging further south. The old social glue was dissolving. The pressure to leave wasn't just coming from the sky, it was coming from within. It was a crisis of faith, a crisis of society, and it was happening at the exact same moment the rain stopped. The migration trail. They didn't vanish, they walked. The proof is a trail of broken pottery. Archaeologists like Scott Ortman from the University of Colorado Boulder began to follow the evidence. Mesa Verde black-on-white pottery, so common in the north, starts to disappear. And at the same time, new distinctive styles begin to appear in a clear southward and eastward path. You can literally map the movement of people by the art they left behind. They followed the rivers. The Rio Grande Valley in what is now New Mexico saw a massive population boom right around the year 1300. Refugees from the north arrived, bringing their skills, their families, and their culture. You can see it in the architecture. Square kivas, common in the north, start appearing in the southern pueblos, which traditionally used round ones. They were building new communities, new alliances, reorganizing their entire world. Ortman took it a step further. He traced language. Many of the northern migrants spoke a language called Tewa. He showed how features of the ancient Tewa language and culture mapped directly onto the archaeological trail, connecting the people of the Mesa Verde region to modern Tewa-speaking pueblos like San Ildefonso and Santa Clara. They weren't Anasazi who vanished. They were Tewa speakers, Kare speakers, Zuni speakers, and Hopi speakers who undertook a multi-generational migration. They left one home and made another. The living voices. The final and most important layer of evidence was there all along. It just wasn't written in a scientific journal. It was held in the memories and oral traditions of the living Pueblo people. For centuries, Pueblo elders have passed down the stories of their migrations. The Hopi clans have detailed accounts of their journey from the north. The Zuni tell of their search for the middle place. The people of Acoma and the Rio Grande Pueblos know exactly which ancestors came from the abandoned cities. To them, there was never a mystery. Chaco and Mesa Verde were not the lands of a lost, alien people. They are ancestral homes. Joseph Suina, a leader from Cachiti Pueblo, speaks of it plainly. They see these sites as the homes of their grandparents. In 2017, science finally caught up with oral tradition. A study published in the journal Nature Communications analyzed ancient DNA from the remains of individuals buried at Chaco Canyon. They compared it to the DNA of modern Pueblo communities. The result was unequivocal. A direct maternal line, a genetic thread stretching over 1,000 years, connected the people who built the great houses directly to the living Pueblo people of today. Science proved what the Pueblo people had been saying for centuries. They are still here. So why do we still hear the word Anasazi? Why does the myth persist? Because vanished is a romantic story, but resilience is a more powerful one. The preferred term is ancestral pueblones. It acknowledges the connection. It returns their history to them. It replaces the ghost story with a human one. This is not a story of collapse. It is a story of survival. Ancestral Pueblo people faced a perfect storm of climate change, resource depletion, and internal conflict. They were not passively destroyed by it. They made a conscious choice. They left behind a world that was no longer working and forged a new one. They reorganized their society, embraced new beliefs, and built new homes in places that could sustain them. The great cities were left to the earth, but the people who built them carried their world within them. Today, that world lives on in the dances at Hopi, the language spoken at Zuni, the pottery made at Acoma. The physical journey is now understood, but many questions remain. What was the exact nature of the new religion that pulled them south? What specific social conflicts pushed them to the breaking point? We know where they went, but the deepest spiritual reasons for why they chose to go are still being pieced together, a conversation between archaeologists and the descendants themselves. It reminds us that some parts of history do not belong to science alone. They belong to the people who lived it.